Hello, everyone. I am Nordlund Westman, and you are listening to The Disciple Hour, episode 29. I am joined today by Ian and John Malt, and our topics today are the banality of evil, and if we have time, humility. Now, I'm going to give John Malt the word, and he will introduce the banality of evil.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. This is John Malt. And yeah, it was my idea to talk about the banality of evil as a topic. The banality of evil, just to give you a brief background, that phrase was coined by actually a Jewish man about 50 or 60 years ago when he was writing a book about some events of the 1940s, let's just say. And what he meant by that phrase, the banality of evil, is most of the people allegedly committing these crimes said, hey, I'm just doing my job. They didn't want to do it, or it wasn't their original idea. It wasn't their intention, or they weren't consciously wanting to do it. They were just going along with orders. They were just going along with the majority, going along with the herd. The word banal, from banality, banal means bland or boring or unoriginal or trite. And so the phrase banality of evil means it's said that the majority of evil, upwards of 80 or even 90%, is of that type. People who don't consciously intend to do evil, but they do anyway, either through laziness or through carelessness or ignorance, not thinking, not caring, apathy, that kind of thing. Take the parent who continues to send their child to government schools as they get worse and worse and worse. Dangerous, unholy, wicked in a lot of ways, but they keep sending their children over and over again. Most of them are probably just doing it out of laziness. They're probably just doing it out of habit, routine, taking the easy way out. They don't want to find another solution. They don't want to find a private school or homeschool. They want to just put their children on the bus in the morning and be done. The rest is somebody else's job. That, I think, would be a good example of the banality of evil. They don't consciously want their kids exposed to danger, Satanism, transgenderism, whatever they're talking about in schools these days, all of the above, I'm sure, but they're not consciously choosing it. Or rather, they are, but just in a passive way. They just want the easy way out. It's too hard to stand against the herd. They don't have the courage in a lot of ways. It's easier to just go along, to get along. That would be, I think, a very good example of the banality of evil. You could probably think of a lot more examples, but the point is, most people don't wake up in the morning and say, I want to be wicked today. Most of them just kind of go along with what others are doing, take the easy way out, the path of least resistance. And in that sense, the majority of evil is banal. It's unintended. It's done out of laziness or apathy or ignorance or wanting to fit in, something like that. Now, they are doing evil, even though they aren't, even though they didn't wake up in the morning and decide to be evil. In a way, they still kind of chose it. So they're not entirely innocent here. But the point is, most people don't intend directly, consciously, to be evil. They just kind of fall into it for one reason or another. Maybe that's being too generous, but it is still a sin. It is still their responsibility. And mine too. I mean, I'm sure I've done it in my life. We are not excused. We're not off the hook. The purpose is to explain the nature of, like I said, 80 or 90% of evil. Most people don't decide to be wicked. They just do it anyway for one reason or another. That's my opening, my intro. I have more to say, but I'll let you two comment if you like.
That is a very good topic. I am concerned about this because of the anti-whiteism, the pervasive anti-whiteism in our society. People, they just move along with the narrative. And we saw this during the C with a kind of a look in the mirror. No, I'm trying to sugarcoat this. Never mind. Catching a cold, okay? People just went with the crowd, totally like sheep. And people who are awake to it, those are the people who can withstand social pressure, like a shepherd. Some of us are shepherds, like 10% maybe, I don't know. But yeah, it is really scary. If the shepherds are evil, then society becomes evil. And vice versa. If the shepherds are good people, then society at large will be rather good. And that is a great responsibility for men like us. But we cannot, I was just going to say, we cannot do it in our own might. We need God with us. But take it away.
I was just going to say that, yes, I mean, the West is run by anti-whites. I mean, it's kind of the biggest irony. It'd be like if, I mean, it's not just one country, it's every country in Europe, North America, Australia, like all these, all the regions of Western people are run by people who are part of an anti-white system. I mean, the only way to ascend in power is to serve anti-whiteism. You know, if you think about how dire that is, it shows what we're up against, that the people that essentially were controlled by a cabal of enemies. And I know cabal sounds very small because there's lots of people in it, but really that's the situation we're in, where all the governing powers are committed to policies that would eradicate the native people. So, you know, they want control, they want power, and, you know, the fact is they understand how to, you know, many methods have been developed for controlling people, and like what kind of things people respond to, what kind of things are most effective in leading people and guiding people's thoughts. So, you know, they know these methods and they know how to implement them, and that's what they're doing. They know how to turn a people against itself. So, you know, for a lot of people, just this banality of evil, it becomes just everyday life. Most people say, "Oh well, what can you do? Just embrace it. It's just the way things are now," and they don't understand how really horrific the implications of it are. I know that we've talked about this before, but like, I mean, something that the last few years have revealed is just how easily led the average person is. How people will, you know, join the mob. People will do what they're told by the voices from on high, essentially. That they'll hate who they're told to hate. They'll love who they're told to love. They'll condemn what they're told to condemn. And, you know, very few people have the courage or the vision to speak out against it. And, you know, that falls to us, people who can see the truth, people who do have morals, people who do truly want goodness and righteousness. And I hope that that applies to people listening as well, that these are people who seek the truth and who seek goodness.
Yeah. And like I said, the responsibility falls on men like us. We have to constantly be fighting the narrative and providing an alternative narrative where we are the good guys. Because most people, they just get stuck in the devil's narrative, in this case, the anti-white narrative, and they don't have a clue that they are in someone else's narrative. They will use the lingo of the devil, anti-white slurs and other concepts that undermine us. And people use words that paint them as villains, and they don't even realize it. They use the typical anti-white slur, for example, the R word, which is an umbrella term. It meant maybe something 60 years ago, some person who just genuinely has racial animosity towards other people. And then the term expanded and expanded and expanded, and people tried to run away from it. But now all white people are, quote unquote, R, and only white people can be R. And most people just don't realize that they are in another, just the devil's narrative. And so we have to constantly be fighting it and giving our people the psychological defenses against this psychological warfare nonstop. It never ends for men like us. And it can be tiresome. Like, we are not really made for a psychological warfare. Our people have been great warriors, but most of us are just minding our own business. We want to build, we want to farm, and then we are under this massive psychological warfare, and most of us just get demoralized. Now, this is why we have to count on God to give us the strength, to give us the power and the willpower. There is no way that we can do this in our own might. And so that's the solution to the banality of evil, in my opinion. And you can chime in if you want to.
I actually wasn't looking for a solution. I mean, it's great that you provided one. I wanted to describe the problem. The problem with most evil is people just going along with it. Or, like I said, out of ignorance or out of apathy, any reason but the desire to be wicked. That I just wanted to describe the problem, but you did a very good job of proposing a solution.
Well, all right then, thank you. But I hope it's not an oversimplification, though. It's really just the solution is to fight and be moral and be good and righteous. But also, and this kind of forms a bridge onto our next topic.
Can I just say this? Before we exit this topic, let me just say that we should be vigilant with ourselves to make sure that we aren't committing evil out of ignorance or laziness or apathy. We should always apply it to ourselves too. We should hold ourselves to the same standard. Let's always make sure that we are not doing evil by accident or by ignorance or just out of laziness or cowardice. Let's be vigilant with ourselves too.
That's a great point. I wasn't gonna shut down the topic entirely, but like you said, we have to be vigilant, and it starts with humility, which is our second topic. People have to really just humble themselves and admit that they have been deceived by the devil. There is no shame in doing so. The devil is, I hate to say it, intelligent, cunning, and he leads people astray, entire nations even. But we have to humble ourselves and admit when we are deceived, when we have followed the crowd and done evil things. And so that was just a bridge I wanted to form here. But please, if you have anything more to say, say so. Going once, going twice. All right. So the topic of humility. As Christians, we are supposed to humble ourselves. First and foremost, before the Lord. Second, we are supposed to seek the truth in all cases. It can leave me gobsmacked when I see Christians, quote unquote, questioning everything, and yet believe every piece of lie by the devil when it comes to history and racial matters. For example, I know Christians who are willing to humble themselves and truly question whether the earth is flat or not. They actually did it and came to the conclusion that it's indeed round. Okay, fair enough. But they won't budge when it comes to differences in biospirits. I tell them that the same people pushing the one gender, the fluid gender, mimetic pathogen, are the same people pushing the one race, the human race, mimetic pathogen. So my question is, what will it take for these people to humble themselves truly and admit that they've been deceived when it comes to the biospirit, for example, and other things? What does it really take to humble yourself? Any ideas?
I don't know what it'll take. Excuse me. I don't know what it'll take exactly, but I mean, I think that this is the constant tension point in Christianity, that most people don't want to humble themselves because it's human nature to want to be powerful, to want to be more intelligent. It's to feel superior to others and hold some position of superiority. That's just a natural human tendency. So in some ways, that's the great challenge of Christianity. It's, who's willing to humble themselves and who's willing to submit to God, and who was going to cling to their own selfishness stubbornly. And I've heard this pointed out before, but really humility is one of the biggest recurring themes throughout the Bible. That, David, for example, he was God chose him as king, even though he was just a humble shepherd. Jesus himself was born in a stable. I mean, you think this is the man who's going to save the world? He's born surrounded by, animals, and in this place that's probably not very clean. I mean, that's a very humble beginning. And, even Jesus' crucifixion, he was mocked. He was held up to scorn. I mean, this isn't like, he's not just some glorious king who came in and slew everybody who people would naturally submit to. He was telling the message that we see through all this is that, humility and is important, and that God doesn't just glorify those who assert their superiority or who look more pretty or more powerful than others. It's about, who's willing to be humble, who's willing to submit to God, and who's willing to set aside their pride. God chooses, the unlikely. And so, as far as like what it's going to take for people to humble themselves, I mean, I think God's going to have to humble them personally. And, some will be called to do that. Some won't. And that's, it's just going to take the Holy Spirit touching people's heart, is what I think.
Okay, right. So basically, fast and pray that they will wake up. No, I'm kidding. No, but seriously, no, not really. I mean, if God is the only one who can humble people, then really all we can do is pray that He will humble them.
I think it'll take courage. Your question was, what will it take for people to start questioning the race narrative, I think it'll take courage. We have to keep in mind, nobody really cares if somebody thinks the earth is flat. Nobody really cares if there are people out there with that idea. It has no social consequence. It's like if you were to dispute one of Newton's laws or something like that. Nobody really cares if you think some digit is squared instead of cubed. Nobody has any concern if you think that. But as soon as you start questioning the racial narrative, then you're going to upset a lot of people, and that takes courage. So a lot of people are more than happy to humble themselves or imagine they're humbling themselves when it comes to questioning the roundness or flatness of the earth, because nobody truly cares what answer they arrive at anyway. It'll have no social consequence.
That's true, because we've been conditioned to think that it's immoral to question the biospirits and more things. Like it's so funny and yet so sad that economists, they try to answer the $1 million question: why do some nations fail and some succeed? And economists will look at every possible thing except the genetic makeup of the people. They will analyze, I mean it, every single detail in the culture, in the geography, in the people's history, but never the genetic makeup. The idea that two populations might be different and as a result form different societies, have different biospirits. The idea to even, the thought of even just thinking that is deemed immoral inside the anti-white narrative, of course. But doing so as an economist in the mainstream, that would mean a job loss. Yeah, and so basically your life is ruined. And so people won't. And so, it does take courage, but people also need the tools to frame this properly in a white positive manner. And that is what we are trying to spread around. Concepts that empower our people, and we are trying to shatter the very destructive belief that white people can only stand up for themselves if they are playing the villain in the anti-white narrative. That is completely false. That is an anti-white idea. You can be good and righteous and stand up for white well-being. Do not let anyone tell you different. And so, people need the tools to frame it properly, and they need courage. And then they need to humble themselves.
If I could just say about humility, I think really, as kind of along the lines of what you're saying, is the entire modern world is sort of a monument to a lack of humility. Like, I think people who reject God, people who reject, the wisdom that in the Bible, in some ways it really does come down to arrogance. Like, I mean, we see all these, revolutions that purport to have a better way to do things, and they say, oh, we don't need a religion. It's old fashioned, it's superstitious, it's not rational. And, if we just rely on human wisdom, then we'll come to all kinds of great conclusions about, democracy and equality. Like I've actually seen some like atheist types say this, that, all these wonderful quote unquote ideas come from people who have a rational mindset. And yet it's so absurd when you look at the world today where, our societies are falling apart, socially, people ignore basic realities like as you mentioned, is the reality of race, and a lot of the, you could have a field day with some of these like internet fedora atheist types, and how a lot of these people are so in love with their own intellect they don't realize how dumb they actually are. But you know, it's really a testament to arrogance where people have certain orthodoxies they can't question, like the reality of race, or that maybe things that are in the Bible actually do hold truth, and they think, well, we know. Essentially, they're saying we know better than God. God gave us His word, but we can come up with something better. Well, and then when things end in disaster like we see today, people are just scratching their heads like, gee, what went wrong? Everything was supposed to work here. We were so rational, we were so grounded in empiricism and what have you. But it's sort of like God's way of saying, well, you ignored me at your own peril. I showed you the truth, and you decided you could come up with something better. So it really is almost like just the lack of humility comes back to bite people all the time when they ignore God. So yeah, I think that when I look at the modern world today, what I see is a lack of humility, and where that leads.
And let me just say that here in the United States, the ultimate, or one of the biggest and most salient examples of what happened to this place would be Detroit. You can talk about why some places prosper and then fail. Detroit used to be the nicest place to live in the United States. Henry Ford built it up with the Ford Motor Company. It became the most prosperous place in the country, and one of the most prosperous places in the world. And today it is the worst in the country. And I'm not exaggerating. It is one of the worst, most dangerous places to live in the country. It went from best to worst in roughly 50 or 60 years, maybe less than that. And we all know what happened. The people changed. I'm not going to go into details here on YouTube, but there were some changes in the demographics, and nobody wants to talk about that.
It wasn't Democrat policies.
Yeah, that's the cover.
Yep.
Well, those policies are downstream from the biospiritual expressions projected onto the environment, of course. And the biospirit changed in, like you said, like, I don't know, a few decades. But one thing that really bothers me about, for example, Detroit, it's pretty obvious what happened. I mean, you had these images I've seen from Detroit back in like the 40s. This is like, I don't want to say paradise lost, but truly a wonderful place lost. And now it is a dirt hole, total dirt hole. You can go on Google Maps and just about anywhere in Detroit and see the state of the city. Houses crumbling down everywhere. It is just, it's really sad to see. And everyone knows really what it is. And the same can be said about Baltimore. This is not our biospirit. This is a biospirit of a very specific group of people. Everyone knows it, but nobody dares say it. And people just have to have humility to admit that, biospirits are very much different. They are all unique and they are all from God, but they are different. And it's actually evil not to talk about it, because the biospiritual harm done to us, Western kind, Westmen, is substantial. We don't want to live in an environment that projects a different biospirit onto the environment. We don't. Our people will white flight. Everywhere where other people have numerical courage, they project their biospirit onto the environment, then white people, they flee. This causes biospiritual discomfort. It causes biospiritual discomfort in little children. That is evil. You are changing an environment that our people created, like Detroit, a truly wonderful place, lost, maybe forever, because of biospiritual change in the environment. And people didn't have the humility to admit that. And that is also kind of the banality of evil, right? People, they just shut their eyes to this problem, and it led to a destruction of Western civilization in Detroit. And again, just proving wherever you find Western civilization, you find Western kind. And in places that have been white erased, like Detroit, you lose Western civilization. And that is evil. It's evil. And so people have to speak out against it. We have a duty. You know, I can speak for myself when I say this. I truly want all peoples of the earth to live in an environment that is good for them. And anti-whiteism stands in the way of doing that. If we were truly to humble ourselves and come together as a people and just admit that, yes, we have different biospirits and they are incompatible, and we will just solve these issues we have. Western kind will have its territory, and we will project our biospirit onto our environment, and we will feel harmony once again, and other people will do the same. It is wrong for us to place our high standards on other people because our standards are downstream from our biospirit. But we can't do that right now because of anti-whiteism. And so if you're listening, dear listener, dear viewer, if you truly want world peace, if you want all people to get along well, then you have to speak out against anti-whiteism. You will not have any paradise if this continues. You have to have the humility to admit this, and you need the courage to fight against it. And that will be my final point. Gentlemen, do you have anything to say?
Yeah, I mean, I thought you made a very good point there about how this affects children. I mean, I've actually heard that, studies have shown that people are more naturally at ease when they're surrounded by people of their own race and whatnot. So, like, people do feel more stressed when they're in the presence of people who are not of their race. And so, and, non-white groups will talk about this all the time, how like, oh, I'm surrounded by white people. I just don't feel very safe here. It's like, well, yeah, maybe you don't, because that's not how we were designed. And, if you see these things that are scientifically verifiable, you have to realize this is how God created us. He created us to have an affinity for our own people. He created us to have a desire to be around people who are like us. Like, this is just a natural thing, and it's not born of hatred or antipathy. It's just something inborn. And, I think as racially aware Christians, let's just say we believe that, God ordained the distinctions between the races, and that he wants us to be redeemed as nations. And, this is how conversion can happen more easily, when you have a group of people who can speak each other's language, who think the same way, who have the same biospirit, and it's more easy for them to come to God when they're with people who can understand them and the way they think. And so what you said about children really hit home with me. I mean, placing children into diverse environments is really abusive if you look at it from that perspective, because it essentially is going to create in them a sense that they don't belong, or that what they are naturally, that their own inborn biospiritual expressions are somehow wrong or to be suppressed, and that they can't really be themselves or be who God created them to be. So indeed, it is something that a sincere Christian would speak out against. It is a truth that someone would have to acknowledge. And, I'm sure we don't have time to get into it today, but I mean, it's really clear throughout the Bible that God recognizes distinctions between nations, and that, this idea that we're all supposed to amalgamate into one human race or something is really just not biblical in any way.
Amen. And let me just say, this is not optics. What I just said, I mean it. I want there to be peace. I want everyone to be in God's kingdom. But you won't hasten the coming of the kingdom by regurgitating lies from the devil. And this is why I am so vocal about this. Anti-whiteism has to be entirely destroyed completely if we want to have peace on this planet. And if any anti-white is listening and is going to spread bear a false witness against me, then shame on you. God sees my heart. He knows that I want peace. I don't want I'm not this villain in the anti-white narrative. I genuinely want everyone to get along, but in order to get along, you also have to humble yourself and have the courage to see the truth and admit the truth, recognize the biospiritual differences. Only then can we build the paradise lost, bring back Eden, the kingdom. And those will be my final words. Thank you.
Amen.
Amen.
Hallelujah. Well, this has been a wonderful show. I thank everyone for listening, and God bless you all. Take care. Bye-bye.